Some stories don't start with a scream, a crime, or a rumor. They start with a piece of paper that should have never been written. I first saw it in a Charleston archive so damp with age that the pages felt like skin. An 1847 birth certificate, signed by 3 physicians, each line marked with fear they tried to hide behind numbers. The mother's name was Celia, an enslaved woman who was supposed to be invisible. But the physician's notes recorded something that breaks every rule of medicine, every rule of nature, and every rule of what a human body can do. According to the official records, Celia went from showing 0 signs of pregnancy to delivering a full-term child in less than a week. And the doctors who witnessed it, the best in Charleston, abandoned their careers, fled the state, and swore never to speak of the case again. Before we go deeper into the darkest medical mystery in Charleston history, subscribe right now because stories like this were buried for a reason. And tell me in the comments, which city or country are you watching from? I want to see how far this forgotten secret travels. Because after today, you'll understand why every descendant who knew the truth warned the same thing. Leave Celia's story alone. Charleston in the mid-1800s wasn't just a city. It was an empire built on silence. A place where entire lives were recorded only in ledgers, not memories. A place where suffering powered wealth, and where the truth was often sealed beneath layers of polite society and whitewashed history. When I first stepped into the old Charleston medical records room, I expected dust, mildew, and routine bureaucracy. I didn't expect to feel watched. Not by people, but by the weight of 3 centuries of buried stories. Charleston hides things. It always has. Back in the 1840s, the city looked polished from the outside. Brick mansions, ironworked balconies, cobblestone streets too smooth to be honest. Cotton and rice money poured through its docks. Planters rode into the city with pride, their boots polished by hands that never received a thank you. Carriages rolled past packed slave markets where families were separated with the same indifference used to price livestock. But if you walked just a little farther from the polished streets, you entered a different world. Quarters where enslaved people whispered warnings long before the doctors ever put their pens to paper. Charleston's medical community especially had a reputation, scientific curiosity, they called it. But their curiosity was built on pain. Enslaved bodies were used as teaching material, experimental subjects, and biological puzzles. Consent did not exist. Humanity rarely mattered. And when a case was too disturbing even for them, that's when they buried it. That's when they sealed the files. That's when the city chose silence over truth. The Hartwell Plantation sat 12 miles northwest of Charleston proper, a mid-sized operation run with military precision and a cruelty disguised as efficiency. The field stretched across more than 300 acres, worked by 42 enslaved men, women, and children. Cotton, corn, and rice grew there, but suffering grew faster. Edmund Hartwell, the owner, had inherited the place from his father in 1839. He was a man molded by bitterness, a widower whose wife, Margaret, had died in childbirth. Her death had hollowed him out, turning him cold, desperate to maintain control over the only thing he still had left, the plantation and the people who lived on it. He wasn't known for explosive violence. His cruelty was quieter, methodical, the cruelty of neglect, of indifference, of power that never needed to raise its voice. The real danger came from the overseer, Thomas Gaines, a man imported from Virginia, where he'd earned a reputation for breaking enslaved workers with frightening efficiency. Brutality was his language. Fear was his currency. And in the middle of this world, unseen, unheard, unrecorded except in ledgers, lived Celia. Celia was born on the Hartwell Plantation in 1826, 20 years old by the time the events of 1847 began. Plantation records described her the way enslaved women were always described: strong-built, quiet, obedient, capable. Words that flattened a human being into something that could be measured but never understood. Celia worked mainly inside the main house after Mrs. Hartwell's death, cooking, cleaning, washing, tending to whatever the master demanded. She lived in the shadow of a home she would never be invited to claim as her own. She moved softly, spoke little, and carried secrets that no one bothered to ask about. There were others around her, the enslaved community on Hartwell land. Samuel, the blacksmith, a man whose hands had shaped iron for so long that even his scars seemed strong. Old Ruth, the midwife and healer, a woman whose knowledge of childbirth came from helping more than 100 children enter a world that gave them no freedom to choose their fate. The quarters behind the main house held these lives, 12 cabins each packed with families, sorrow, resilience, and whispered prayers. At night, the sounds of chains, wind, fire, and muffled crying blended into a rhythm the city never heard. When I first read the plantation inventory, it felt like reading the cast list of a tragedy already written. But none of those names prepared me for Celia's. What happened to her in March 1847 was impossible, not just scientifically but morally. Impossible in a way that left even Charleston's most arrogant doctors shaken. But before her collapse, before the pregnancy no one saw coming, before the fire that erased her and her child from the plantation, Celia lived a life of routine. Her winter of 1846 was described by others as uneventful. She worked. She cleaned. She ate little. She spoke even less. Old Ruth would later say Celia had shown no signs, absolutely none, of pregnancy during that time. No swelling. No morning sickness. No appetite changes. No fatigue beyond normal exhaustion. Not even the smallest hint that something was growing inside her. And yet something was. Something that defied medicine. Something that moved fast. Something that the doctors would later call biologically impossible. I remember sitting in that archive room, reading the first physician's note. Patient presents no observable signs of gravidity at any point prior to March 18, 1847. Another note. Yet examination reveals evidence of an advanced pregnancy, estimated 7 to 8 months. My hands actually shook. Not from fear, but from the realization that I was reading a case Charleston's medical society had tried very hard to make people forget. This wasn't a ghost story. This wasn't folklore. This was a documented medical panic. One plantation. One enslaved woman. One impossible pregnancy. And a trail of silence that started in 1847 and still reaches us now, in the pages they hoped no one would ever open again. 1831 Alabama. One plantation. One forbidden story. The blood begins here. Before we move on, ask yourself, if a city hides something for 175 years, what does that say about the truth? Before Celia's name was sealed in Charleston's medical archives, it lived in places where ink was rarely used. Whispers, work songs, and the quiet glances passed between enslaved women who saw more than they were ever allowed to speak. When I first saw her name on the 1847 birth certificate, it was just 5 letters. Small. Unassuming. But the deeper I went into the plantation ledgers and the private letters of the Hartwell family, the more I realized something chilling. Celia was never meant to be remembered. Everything about her life had been designed to disappear, until the impossible forced the city to write her down. Celia's story begins long before the pregnancy. She was born into slavery on Hartwell land in 1826. Her mother died when she was still young, and her early years were spent in the fields pulling weeds, carrying water, and learning the rules of survival from older women who had learned them through blood. By her teens, she'd been moved into the main house to replace Mrs. Hartwell, who had grown increasingly ill before her death. Celia's presence was quiet, efficient, almost ghost-like. She carried out every order without hesitation. She scrubbed, cooked, washed, and worked from before dawn to long after the lamps dimmed. Plantation ledgers described her with the emotionless efficiency of a farmer pricing cattle. Strong-built female, age 20. Reliable temperament. Fit for house duties. No disciplinary issues. But ledgers lie. And the few voices who truly knew her, Samuel, Ruth, Grace, paint a different picture. According to their accounts, Celia was not the docile figure her records suggested. She was observant. She was protective of others. And though she rarely spoke back, she carried a deep, quiet strength that made overseers uneasy without understanding why. Old Ruth had been like a mother to her. Ruth had delivered most of the children born on the plantation. Her hands had held babies before their mothers ever got the chance. Her knowledge of childbirth was legendary among enslaved communities, passed down from generations of women who had learned how to help each other survive when medicine refused to see them as human. Ruth once told Samuel, "Celia got a spirit in her. Strong spirit. The kind they don't like to see in us." Still, Celia stayed invisible. On plantations, invisibility was often the best weapon a woman could have. The less noticed you were, the safer you were. But that safety was fragile. The overseer, Thomas Gaines, noticed everyone. He was a man who believed pain was a tool. He used it freely, on men, on women, even on children who moved too slowly. His presence alone made the enslaved community go still, the way animals freeze when they sense a predator nearby. Gaines kept his attention away from Celia for years. Not because he respected her. Overseers rarely respected anyone, but because Edmund Hartwell kept the main house separated from the daily violence of the fields. Hartwell preferred order, predictability, quiet. Celia was quiet. Celia kept the house running. Celia never caused trouble. but the world around her did. The winter of 1846 was harsh. Food was scarce. Workloads increased. Sickness swept through the quarters. Yet Celia continued her duties as if unaffected. No complaints, no signs of exhaustion, no changes in her body that would suggest what was happening beneath her skin. Later, witnesses swore she showed no physical changes at all. Not even the earliest markers of pregnancy. Old Ruth was the first to point this out. Ruth knew the signs. She'd delivered over 100 children. She could diagnose pregnancy before a woman even felt it. And Ruth said with certainty, Celia wasn't pregnant. Not one bit. This detail haunts me. Not because pregnancy can't be hidden, sometimes it can, but because everyone agreed there was nothing to hide. So how did she go from normal on March 17th to collapsing in agony on March 18th? That's where the story starts breaking the rules of nature. Samuel's journals add another layer to Celia's truth. He wrote that Celia had become quieter than usual that winter. She wasn't sick, but something about her seemed withdrawn, tense, as if she were waiting for something she couldn't explain. He wrote, Celia got a look in her eyes, like she listening to something nobody else can hear. Was it a warning? A premonition? Or something growing inside her long before the doctors realized it? Charcoal sketches found in Samuel's journal decades later show small drawings. A woman standing alone, a dark circle over her stomach, figures watching from behind pine trees. Samuel never explained the sketches. His descendants said he used drawings to express things he didn't want to name. Whatever he sensed about Celia, he knew something was coming. The enslaved community had their own understanding of danger, an instinct sharpened by generations of loss. They knew when storms were coming even before clouds formed. They knew when a child would not survive its first night. And they knew when something unnatural had entered their world. Grace, a young enslaved girl who often worked near Celia, told Ruth, There's something wrong in the house. Something in the air. I feel it. Ruth didn't dismiss her. She'd felt it too. Sometimes danger arrives quietly, disguised in routine. And sometimes it grows in silence until it reveals itself all at once. For Celia, the reveal came the morning she collapsed. A moment where every rule of life, science, and nature cracked open. A moment that none of them would ever forget. A moment that forced Charleston's finest doctors to confront a truth so disturbing they buried it for 175 years. 1831 Alabama. One plantation. One woman. One impossible warning. Before we move to the next section, ask yourself, if her body showed nothing for 8 months, what was growing inside her? It happened on a Thursday morning, March 18, 1847. A day that began like every other, with cold air gathering over the Hartwell plantation and the enslaved quarters rising before dawn to begin another cycle of endless labor. The fields were still damp from the night, and the pine woods behind the cabins carried a silence no one paid attention to at first. Celia woke before sunrise as she always did. She lit a small flame to warm water, washed her face, and wrapped her shawl against the lingering winter chill. There was nothing unusual in her movements, no sign of distress or illness, nothing that hinted the world was about to turn against every known rule of human biology. She walked to the main house with a bundle of firewood against her hip. Witnesses say she moved normally, steady, balanced, purposeful. And then, without warning, she froze. Not stumbled. Not slipped. Not cried out. Just froze. Her eyes went wide, the firewood fell from her hands, and she clutched her abdomen like something inside her had awakened all at once. Then she collapsed. Art. The thud echoed through the kitchen, stopping the other enslaved women mid-task. Grace screamed. Another woman ran out the back door to shout for old Ruth. Samuel, hearing the commotion from the blacksmith shed, came running as well. When Ruth arrived, Celia was conscious but barely, sweating, trembling, her breath frantic and shallow. Ruth knelt beside her, placed both hands on her abdomen, and recoiled as if she'd touched hot metal. Ruth's voice broke the silence in the room. I ain't touching this. This ain't natural. The fear in her voice froze everyone. Ruth had delivered babies born breech, babies born blue, babies born too small to cry. She had treated fevers, infections, broken bones, things that would make doctors flinch. But whatever she felt beneath her palms that morning made her step back like she'd touched something alive and watching. She said it again, louder this time. This ain't right. Mr. Hartwell need to get a real doctor. The words real doctor carried weight. Enslaved people usually avoided white physicians unless absolutely necessary. Doctors could be cruel, careless, experimental. But Ruth refused, truly refused, to examine Celia. That alone told the enslaved community everything they needed to know. Edmund Hartwell was irritated when he received word. Celia collapsing interrupted his breakfast routine, a crime in his mind. But he wasn't stupid. Enslaved women were property, and property that delivered babies had value. He sent for Dr. William Saunders from Charleston, instructing a rider to reach the city as quickly as possible. For the next hours, Celia lay on a bed inside the main house, shaking, her abdomen rigid and strangely distended. Witnesses described movement under her skin, fast, sharp, like something pushing from the inside. No one approached her except to give water. Even they stood as far away as possible. Grace whispered to Samuel, her stomach moving all wrong, like it got its own mind. Dr. Saunders arrived late that afternoon, expecting a miscarriage or stomach illness. Instead, he found a case that would break Charleston's medical world. His initial notes, which I held in my hands 175 years later, read, abdomen grossly distended. Movement visible. Suggests advanced pregnancy. Yet patient has shown no physical signs of pregnancy prior to this morning. No signs. No symptoms. Nothing. This was biologically impossible. When he pressed her abdomen, Celia gasped in pain, but the movement beneath her skin continued, steady, rhythmic, unmistakably fetal. But how? She had been working normally only hours before. Her body showed no breast changes. No weight gain. No pelvic widening. No fatigue. No morning sickness. And yet, the child inside her kicked like it had been growing for months. Dr. Saunders wrote another line in shaking handwriting. Estimated gestational age, 7 to 8 months. 7 to 8 months, appearing in a single day? That's when he sent for a second physician, Dr. James Pritchard. And hours later, he sent for the third, Dr. Henry Strickland, Charleston's oldest and most respected medical mind. 3 doctors. 3 examinations. 3 identical conclusions. Celia appeared to be in late-stage pregnancy. Yet she had shown 0 signs the day before. And she insisted she had been with no man. Dr. Pritchard questioned her gently. When did you last lay with anyone? Celia whispered, never. I ain't been with nobody. Ruth confirmed it without hesitation. Ruth had been watching her for months. She would have known. Gaines denied involvement instantly and violently. Edmund Hartwell was genuinely confused. He preferred order, not scandal. The room fell into heavy silence. A pregnant enslaved woman with no father to name was already a problem. But an impossible pregnancy? That was a problem Charleston could not explain. Over the next 3 days, Celia's condition worsened. Dr. Saunders wrote, abdominal circumference increased 4 inches in 72 hours. Rapid progression unprecedented. The fetus grew as they watched. The movement intensified. Celia screamed through the night. She begged Ruth not to let it come out. By the 4th day, the doctors agreed. This child was developing at an unnatural speed. And still, Celia insisted. I ain't been with no man. Something put that thing inside me. I don't know how. I don't know why. Her words frightened even the physicians. When I first read those lines in the archival notes, I had to stop. For a moment, the room felt smaller, colder. Because every observer, even the doctors trained to rationalize everything, recorded the same truth. Celia's case did not follow natural law. Not then. Not now. Not ever. The collapse on March 18th was not the beginning of a pregnancy. It was the beginning of a phenomenon. One that terrified the enslaved community. One that shook Charleston's medical establishment. And one that, 175 years later, still has no explanation. 1831 Alabama. 1 plantation. 1 impossible body. The blood continues. Before we continue, ask yourself, if a pregnancy can begin in a single day, what else can begin that way? When Dr. Strickland arrived at the Hartwell plantation on March 22, 1847, he carried himself with the certainty of a man who believed nature followed rules. Rules he had spent 40 years documenting, measuring, categorizing. Rules that had never failed him. What he walked into destroyed every one of them. I read his notes slowly, twice, then a third time. His handwriting, normally neat and confident, became jagged the deeper he went into the examination. Even after a century and a half, you can feel the tremor in his hand. Celia lay on the bed in the main house, the other enslaved women keeping their distance. Her skin glistened with sweat. Her breathing was shallow, forced. Her abdomen, according to every witness, had doubled in size over 3 days. Not months. Days. The 3 doctors stood around her. Saunders, Pritchard, Strickland. 3 of Charleston's most respected medical men, now whispering like students afraid to say the wrong answer. Dr. Saunders was the first to speak. "Strickland, tell me what you see." Strickland pressed gently on Celia's swollen belly, and the movement beneath her skin responded, violent, intentional, unmistakably alive. He pulled his hand away. "What, in God's name?" Dr. Pritchard stepped forward, jaw tight. "We measured her 3 days ago. Estimated her at 7 to 8 months gestation." Strickland stared at them. "And she had shown no signs prior to that?" "None," Saunders said. "Not a single symptom." Celia, trembling, whispered through clenched teeth. "I told you. I told all of you. I ain't been with no man." Strickland looked at her. He didn't dismiss her. That's what scared me most when I read his notes. He didn't argue, didn't attempt a moral lecture, didn't accuse her of lying. He simply wrote, "Patient's claim of no sexual contact aligns with absence of earlier pregnancy indicators." He believed her. Even without saying it aloud, he believed her. The physicians began a systematic examination. They checked the fetal heartbeat. It thundered through the stethoscope, strong and rhythmic. The kind of heartbeat you'd expect from a full-term infant. Strickland wrote, "Fetal heart tones consistent with 38 to 40 weeks gestation." 38 to 40 weeks. Full term. They measured the abdomen, expanding at an impossible speed. They documented movements, far too strong for something supposedly 72 hours old. They inspected Celia for physical signs of recent intimacy. None. They checked her breast for lactation. Nothing. No enlargement. No tenderness. No hormonal shift. It made no sense. Pregnancy is gradual, slow, predictable. But what they were witnessing was not pregnancy. It was acceleration. Something growing too fast. Something behaving as if it had skipped months of development. Something using Celia's body like a vessel instead of a mother. At one point during the examination, Dr. Pritchard attempted to ease Celia's panic. "Celia, try to tell us, when did you first feel movement?" She shook her head, tears streaking down her temples. "I ain't felt nothing, not till that morning, then it hit me all at once, like it was waking up." "Waking up?" "Yes," she whispered. "Like it'd been asleep, then suddenly alive." Those words stayed in my mind for days after reading them. Alive suddenly. Not growing. Not forming. Just alive. As if whatever was inside her didn't need time to become what it was meant to be. Strickland stepped aside and whispered to the others. "There are only 2 possibilities." Pritchard replied, "Neither are possible." "Say them anyway." Strickland swallowed hard. 1. She concealed the pregnancy using methods unknown to us. Pritchard shook his head. "We examined her. Ruth observed her. She showed none of the physical markers." 2. Strickland continued, "The fetus developed at a rate incompatible with human biology." Saunders exhaled sharply. "Then we cannot report this." Strickland looked at him. "We have to." "No," Saunders hissed. "Not with our names attached. We'd be ruined." This wasn't science anymore. It was fear. Fear of something growing inside a woman who insisted it didn't belong to any man. Fear of what would happen if the medical world learned such a thing existed. Fear of losing control over the laws they had spent a lifetime studying. Throughout the examination, Celia's distress grew worse. She clutched the sheets, breathing in sharp, shallow bursts. Her eyes darted around the room, not at the doctors but at the corners as if something else was there. She whispered repeatedly, it's coming too fast, too fast." Ruth, standing in the doorway, refused to step closer. She crossed her arms tightly, her jaw clenched. Later, she told Samuel, "What grow inside that girl ain't no child. It's something using her body. And it wants out." Ruth had delivered more babies than Dr. Saunders ever had. She knew the rhythms of birth better than any man in the county. And she was terrified. Before leaving, Strickland made one final observation that chills me every time I see the ink. No dilation present. No pre-labor changes. Yet fetal movement indicates imminent delivery. Impossible. Delivery without labor progression? That defies every medical principle. Yet within 24 hours, Celia would begin to scream. The delivery would begin. And what came out would horrify even the men who believed they had seen every form of suffering human bodies could endure. 3 doctors. 3 days. 3 conclusions they refused to speak aloud. This was not a normal pregnancy. This was not natural. This was something else. Something they feared. Something Charleston would hide. Something no one was meant to read 175 years later. 1831 Alabama. 1 plantation. 1 body breaking its own rules. The blood darkens further. Before we continue, ask yourself, what would you do if the laws of nature broke right in front of you? By the night of March 23, 1847, the Hartwell plantation felt wrong. The air was tense, unnaturally still, like the world was holding its breath. Even the animals sensed it. Horses refused their feed, dogs barked at empty corners, and the enslaved workers gathered in tight clusters, whispering prayers they hadn't whispered in years. Celia's screams broke that silence just after sunset. They weren't the cries of a woman in labor. Those were painful, yes, but rhythmic, human. Celia's screams were different. They were raw, jagged, desperate. The kind of sound that makes every person in hearing distance look around, terrified to find its source. Dr. Saunders and Dr. Pritchard ran to her room first. Dr. Strickland followed minutes later, carrying instruments he had only used in rare, dangerous births. Old Ruth stood outside the doorway, shaking her head. "I'm not going in there," she whispered to Samuel. "That thing inside her, it ain't right." Samuel didn't argue. He felt it too. Inside the room, the doctors quickly realized they were not witnessing a normal delivery. The first thing they noticed, Celia wasn't dilated. Not even slightly. And yet, her abdomen thrashed violently, movement far stronger than any fetus should ever be capable of. The doctors exchanged horrified looks. "How is it forcing itself downward without dilation?" Pritchard whispered. Saunders swallowed. "Nature doesn't work like this. None of this works like this." It was the closest he'd come to admitting he was afraid. Strickland placed a hand on Celia's abdomen and immediately recoiled. "It's too strong. Far too strong." The fetus kicked again so forcefully it distorted the skin. Celia sobbed. "Make it stop. Please, make it stop." Her voice cracked. She wasn't pleading for her life. She was pleading for her body, pleading for the thing inside her to stop fighting its way out. The three doctors moved fast. Not because they were prepared, because they were terrified of what would happen if they hesitated. Strickland gestured to the others. "We have to begin the delivery manually. If we wait for natural dilation, she will die." Natural. The word felt like blasphemy in that room. They prepared equipment, boiled water, lit more lamps. Sweat leaked down their necks. Their hands shook even before touching her. And then it happened. Celia arched her back, let out a sound that didn't sound like a human cry, and her body began the impossible. The cervix began dilating so rapidly it defied every medical rule. Pritchard stared, stunned. "I've never seen dilation occur this fast, not in a living woman." Within minutes, she was fully dilated. This was impossible. This was something else. Saunders whispered, voice trembling. "This child is forcing the birth on its own, unnaturally accelerated." The delivery began. Celia screamed until her voice broke. Her throat bled from the force of it. Ruth couldn't stand it. She covered her ears, tears running down her face, whispering, "Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy." Samuel stood frozen outside the door. He would later write, "It sounded like she was being torn in half." Inside, the doctors worked swiftly. The infant's head crowned, larger than normal. Strickland gasped. "This child is enormous. How is she alive?" Infants that size usually killed the mother before birth. But Celia, despite the agony, remained conscious, fighting for breath. When the head emerged, the room went silent. Not because of deformity, there was none. Not because of abnormalities, there were none. The silence fell because something was wrong in a way no medical instrument could measure. The infant's eyes were open. Infants do not open their eyes during delivery. But this one did. And she looked around. Pritchard dropped his forceps. Strickland muttered a prayer. Saunders froze, his face white. The baby blinked once, then began to cry. A loud, powerful cry, too strong, too full, for a newborn. And the horrific uncertainty crystallized. This child was full term. Fully developed. Fully aware. Born from a pregnancy that was less than a week old. At last, after 14 agonizing hours, they pulled the infant free. The baby, later named Dina, weighed 11 pounds. Her limbs were long, muscular. Her skin was smooth. Her movements coordinated. She didn't flail like newborns. She moved with control. Pritchard stuttered, She looks like a 40-week child." Strickland stared at her. "That's because she is." He recorded the findings. Infant displays characteristics of full-term development. Rapid gestation cannot be biologically explained. Celia lay motionless, barely conscious, tears streaming from her eyes. But she refused to look at the child. "That ain't mine," she whispered. "That thing ain't mine." Everyone in the room felt it, saw it, the speed, the strength. The awareness. The child breathed easily. Too easily. She watched every movement. Every person. Like she understood. Edmund Hartwell entered moments later. He glanced at the baby as if she were a new piece of property. Healthy, he said. That's what matters. He named her Dina without emotion. But the physicians exchanged a look filled with dread. They didn't care what Hartwell called the child. They cared what the child represented. A biological anomaly. A medical impossibility. A threat. And above all, a mystery that could end their careers. That night, Strickland wrote in his private journal, words I still cannot shake. We witnessed something not of nature. A birth that should not exist. If this child continues developing at the same rate, what will she become? 1831 Alabama. One plantation. One impossible child. The darkness grows. Before we continue, answer this. If a child is born already awake, already aware, what future is she growing toward? The days after Dina's birth were supposed to bring peace. Birth usually calmed tension in the enslaved quarters. New life gave people something to hope for, even in a place designed to crush hope. But Dina's arrival did the opposite. Fear settled over the plantation like smoke. Everyone felt it. No one said it openly, except old Ruth. Whenever she passed the main house, she stared at the window where the infant slept and muttered, "That child ain't right. God forgive us." Dr. Saunders, Pritchard, and Strickland returned to Charleston, shaken, silent, and unwilling to admit what they had seen. But their fear didn't stop them from writing. In the Charleston Medical Society archives, I found a sealed folder containing their joint report from April 3, 1847. The pages were yellowed, cracked at the edges, but still legible. Their handwriting told the story better than any historian could. One line stood out above everything. Child born full term despite gestational period of less than 7 days. Reading that made my chest tighten. Not premature. Not miscalculated. Not uncertain. They wrote full term. And then just beneath it, developmental acceleration observed in utero may continue postnatally. They predicted that Dina might grow faster outside the womb. They were right. According to Samuel's journal, one of the few first-hand accounts from someone who lived in the enslaved quarters, Dina's growth wasn't merely fast. It was relentless. At 6 weeks old, she held her head up steadily. At 8 weeks, she could crawl with purpose. At 3 months, she could stand while holding on to furniture. By modern standards, this would already be unusual. In 1847, it was terrifying. The enslaved women refused to hold her. Even Celia avoided picking her up, only feeding her when absolutely necessary. When Samuel confronted Celia gently about her distance, she whispered, "She ain't mine. She borrowed me to get born. I ain't her mother." Those words would have sounded like madness if the evidence wasn't living in a cabin 30 feet away. By 6 months of age, according to Samuel's almost daily notes, Dina could walk without assistance. Small steps at first, slow, careful, but far too coordinated for an infant. Samuel wrote, "She walked like a child twice her age, eyes always open wide, always watching." Old Ruth refused to speak of her except when forced. When asked if she had ever seen an infant develop so quickly, she answered with a simple, "Once." She would explain that later, but for now, the memories were too heavy for her to carry freely. The first sign of something cognitively wrong, or cognitively beyond wrong, came at 8 months. Dina spoke. Not babble. Not mama or papa. Not slurred sounds. Her first word was clear. Cold. Grace dropped the cloth she was holding. She ran straight to Ruth, shaking. Ruth's face went pale. "That baby ain't no baby," she whispered. "She got thoughts. Thoughts ain't from an 8-month-old. When Ruth approached Celia later, Celia stared down at her hands and said, "Sometimes I feel her thinking. She think before she speak, and she understand more than she show." This terrified Ruth, not because she didn't believe Celia, but because she did. By 9 months, Dina was forming 2-word sentences. By 12 months, she spoke in short but complete thoughts. Samuel wrote, "She watch people with a knowing, make you feel like she study you, like she measure who you are." And this was not the imagination of frightened enslaved workers. Because when Dr. Pritchard happened to see Dina near the plantation road one day, he noted in his private journal, "Cognitive development comparable to a child of 2.5 years. But awareness, much older." He underlined the word awareness 3 times. Her physical growth was just as alarming. By her 13th month, Dina stood nearly 32 inches tall, closer to a toddler than an infant. Her limbs had strength. Her balance was firm. Her coordination was unnervingly precise. But it was her eyes that frightened everyone. Infants look around. Toddlers stare with curiosity. But Dina observed. She didn't look at people. She looked into people. One enslaved woman described it to Ruth. When she look at me, I feel like she know things I ain't never said. Another refused to come near the cabin again after Dina spoke a sentence perfectly mimicking her voice. Grace said. She talked like she practicing how to be human. Those words should not exist in any normal childhood. But Dina wasn't normal. The enslaved community began to avoid mother and child completely. Not out of cruelty, but instinct. People who lived their entire lives in pain often recognized danger before others did. They stopped sitting in front of their cabins at night. They kept their children away. They prayed more often, whispered hymns, kept charms under their mattresses. Fear became the air they breathed. Celia felt it too. Her body had recovered physically from childbirth, but something inside her was breaking. She barely slept, waking up at the slightest sound. She avoided eye contact. She refused to answer questions unless necessary. She never spoke badly of Dina aloud. But Samuel recorded one moment, one terrible, quiet confession. Celia placed a hand over her heart and whispered, I think she can hear my thoughts. I think she hear everything. He wrote. I asked her what she mean. She say she felt the child respond to thoughts not said out loud. Ruth believed this. She had seen something similar once, decades earlier, on another plantation, in another child that should not have existed. And she feared the same ending. Dina was growing, stronger, smarter, more aware, not like a child, not like a human following nature's rules, more like something becoming, something that might soon realize it was different, something that might stop hiding it. 1831 Alabama. One plantation, one child too aware. The blood shift begins. Before you continue, ask yourself, what happens when something grows smarter than the people meant to raise it? By the time Dina reached her 12th month, the fear in the enslaved quarters had solidified into something heavier than dread. It was certainty. Not suspicion. Not superstition. Certainty. Something was wrong with the child. Something no one wanted to say aloud, because speaking the truth made it real. Even the wind seemed to move differently when she was outside. Samuel described it in his journal. It get quiet when she walk, like the world listening. The turning point came one evening in late March 1848. Celia was standing outside her cabin, washing a tin bowl, when Dina walked toward her with a strange stiffness. Not clumsy like children learning to balance, but deliberate, measured, almost adult. She stared up at Celia with her unnervingly steady eyes and asked, Why don't you love me? Celia froze. The bowl slipped from her hands, clattering to the ground. How you know that? She whispered. Dina blinked once. You think it loud. It hit Celia like a blow. Her knees buckled. She backed away, shaking, her voice trembling. Stay away from me, please, please. But Dina didn't move. She just watched. Quiet. Unblinking. Samuel, who had been repairing a shovel nearby, witnessed the whole thing. He wrote, Child stand still like she understand the fear she cause. Like she learning it. That night, Celia didn't sleep. Ruth found her sitting upright in bed at dawn, rocking slightly, eyes wide. When Ruth placed a hand on her shoulder, Celia whispered, She hear what I ain't saying. She know when I want to run. She know when I'm scared. She know when I look at her and see a stranger. Ruth hesitated. Then for the first time she spoke the truth she'd been holding back for months. Celia, I seen this before. Celia's head jerked up. Ruth looked toward the woods as if speaking too loudly might call something forward. A long time ago, when I was little, there was a woman on a sugar plantation in Louisiana. She had a child, like Dina. Celia's breath caught. The baby grew fast. Too fast. Talked early. Walked early. Watched everybody. People said it understood things no baby should. Celia clenched her jaw. What happened? Ruth swallowed hard. The master tried to sell it. Nobody would buy it. They said looking in its eyes felt like looking in a mirror that seen your thoughts. Celia trembled. And the woman? The mother? Ruth hesitated for a long time. She drowned herself, and the child, in the river. Silence. Cold, suffocating silence. Why? Celia whispered. Ruth closed her eyes. She said that thing wasn't hers. Said something used her body to get born. Celia broke. She collapsed forward, sobbing into Ruth's skirt. Why me? She cried. What did I do? Why did this happen to me? Ruth held her, voice cracking. It ain't you. It's something older. Something that don't care about mamas or babies. It choose where it gonna come. And it chose you. While Celia unraveled, Dina grew stronger. Her awareness sharpened. Her comprehension widened. Her emotions became disturbingly controlled. When other children cried, Dina watched them. When adults whispered, she listened. When Ruth prayed nearby, Dina would tilt her head as if analyzing the meaning beneath the words. Once, Grace accidentally dropped a bucket near Dina. Dina didn't flinch. She didn't jump. She didn't react like a child. Instead, she looked at Grace and asked, "What did you think was going to hurt you?" The question was too mature, too pointed, too knowing. Grace ran. She refused to return to Celia's cabin. Another moment, recorded by Samuel, confirmed the enslaved workers' worst fears. A group of children were playing outside, rolling a wooden hoop. Dina approached them. She was barely over a year old, yet tall enough to pass for two. She watched the older children with quiet interest before picking up the hoop herself. The children waited for her to do what toddlers would normally do: trip, wobble, or drop it. Dina didn't. She spun the hoop perfectly. Controlled. Smooth. Like a child twice her age. The children froze. One whispered, "She ain't like us." Dina turned, expression blank, and said, "I know." The children ran. Dina didn't chase them. She just stood there, turning the hoop in her hands like she was studying something invisible to everyone else. The most unsettling incident, however, happened late one night when Celia was alone in the cabin with her. Ruth later described how she had seen a faint light flickering across the cabin wall through the cracks, like lamp flame. But Celia insisted she hadn't lit a lamp. Dina was sitting on the floor, hands out, palms open. The air near her fingertips shimmered. Not fire. Not light. A heat that didn't belong there. Celia screamed. The next morning, she went to Samuel. She didn't ask for help. She asked for honesty. "Samuel, do you think she's human?" Samuel looked at Celia, saw the hollow terror in her eyes, and wrote, "I told her the truth she already knew. I told her no." And through all of this, Dina herself seemed calm. Almost peaceful. She wasn't malicious. She wasn't violent. She wasn't outwardly cruel. But there was something else. Something beneath her skin, behind her eyes, inside her mind. Something that wasn't meant to grow in a child's body. Something that was learning too quickly. Something that was adapting. When Samuel saw her pick up a fallen feather and flip it between her fingers like she was studying the patterns of life itself, he wrote, "She a child wearing a child's shape. But she ain't a child. She's something wearing a baby's skin." By her 15th month, Dina was speaking in 5-word sentences. By her 16th, she could repeat conversations she'd overheard hours earlier, word for word. By her 17th, she had begun asking questions about things she should never understand. Why do people die? Why do some people own others? Why do grown men fear things they can't see? And the enslaved community asked a question of their own. What happens when this thing becomes old enough to act? Ruth said it first. "Child like that ain't meant to grow long. Something gonna break. And when it do, people gonna die." 1831 Alabama. One plantation. One mother breaking beneath the truth. The blood moves closer. Before we continue, ask yourself, if a mother knows her child is not hers, what does she do next? By late summer of 1848, a strange tension settled over the Hartwell plantation, like the ground itself was waiting for something to snap. The enslaved people felt it first, then the animals, then even Edmund Hartwell, who prided himself on ignoring anything that didn't affect his profit, began to sense a heaviness in the air. But the person who felt it most was Celia. Every day Dina grew taller. Every day her eyes seemed older. Every day her questions cut deeper. Why do people lie? Why do people hurt each other? Why does fear have a taste? Celia pretended she didn't hear her. But Dina always noticed. "You're scared again," she would say. "You think loud." Celia lived in a constant state of terror. She slept lightly. She ate little. She avoided looking into her daughter's eyes. And Gaines, the overseer, was about to make that terror explode. On the evening of September 3, 1848, the air was humid, thick enough to taste. A storm was building over the marshlands, but no one knew whether it would break before dawn. Gaines stumbled into the main house kitchen drunk, cursing under his breath. He'd argued with Edmund earlier about stolen cotton weights, an argument he lost, and now his anger needed a target. Celia was standing at the counter washing a pot. Gaines slammed the door so hard that the window rattled. "You," he barked, pointing at her. "You think you better than the others now that you got Hartwell's attention?" Celia stiffened. She didn't look at him. That was her mistake. Gaines hated being ignored. He staggered forward and grabbed her by the arm so hard she dropped the pot. "Look at me when I talk, girl." Celia's breath caught. Her mind raced. She whispered, "Please don't." He slapped her across the face, so hard her body hit the floor. The sound echoed through the house. Crack. The slap itself wasn't unusual for Gaines. He had done far worse to others. But what happened next was something none of them would ever understand. Because Dina saw everything. The child had been sitting in the corner playing with a broken spoon, humming softly to herself. When Celia fell, Dina stopped humming. Slowly she stood up. She walked toward Gaines, not stumbling, not afraid, not crying. Walking with purpose. She stopped when she reached him and stared up, her small chest rising and falling with quiet, controlled breaths. Gaines frowned. "What you staring at, little pickaninny?" Dina didn't blink. "You shouldn't have done that." Her voice was flat, cold, certain. Gaines laughed, an uneasy, mocking laugh. "And what you gonna do about it?" Dina tilted her head slightly. "You're already dead. You just don't know it yet." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Even Gaines felt it. His smile faltered. Something in Dina's eyes chilled him. Something ancient, something knowing. He took a step back. "What's wrong with that child?" he muttered, suddenly sober. Celia whispered from the floor. "Don't look at her. Don't look at her." But it was too late. Gaines had already looked. He fled the kitchen, muttering curses, shaking his head as if trying to rid himself of something sticking to his thoughts. He slammed the door behind him. But according to every enslaved worker who saw him that night, Gaines didn't walk back to his cabin like a drunk man. He walked back like a hunted man. He kept stopping, turning around, staring into the darkness, as if someone, or something, was following him just beyond the lamplight. At one point he collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest. Grace, who witnessed it from the slave quarters, said, "He looked like he'd seen something that wasn't there, like he was dying from the inside." The next morning, Thomas Gaines was found dead in his bed. His eyes were open wide, frozen in terror. His mouth twisted as if he had tried to scream. The blanket was clenched tightly in his fists. But there were no wounds, no bruises, no sign of struggle. He looked like a man who had been frightened to death. Dr. Saunders arrived before dawn. Edmund wanted proof of natural causes. The doctors wanted answers. They got neither. Saunders wrote in his examination notes, "Heart shows no signs of disease or failure. Cardiac function ceased suddenly as if all activity halted at once. Cause of death, undetermined." Undetermined. But the enslaved community knew. They whispered it in the fields, in the cabins, in the shadows. Dina killed him. Not with hands. Not with poison. With something else. Something inside her. Something she can do. Celia didn't speak for 2 days after Gaines's death. When she finally did, it was only 4 words. "I told you so." She wasn't boasting. She wasn't relieved. She was breaking. Because if a child could kill without touching, if a child could frighten a grown man to death, if a child could reach inside someone's mind, then what would she be capable of next? Fear consumed the plantation. Children were kept inside. Men walked in groups. Women prayed loudly at night. Even Edmund Hartwell felt the shift. But he didn't blame Dina. He blamed Negro superstition. He replaced Gaines with a new overseer and demanded the workers forget their nonsense. But the workers hadn't forgotten. They couldn't. Samuel wrote, "Gaines dead because he strikes Celia. Everybody know it. Child didn't have to touch him. Just looked at him. Something moved inside him and took his life." Old Ruth said it plain. That thing ain't a baby. It a warning. And the warning ain't over yet. 1831 Alabama. One plantation. One death without fingerprints. The blood shifts into shadow. Before you continue, ask yourself, if a child can kill with a look, what happens when she learns to do more? Word of the overseer's death spread through Charleston faster than Edmund Hartwell could contain it. He had hoped the matter would stay confined to plantation gossip, but rumors reached the wrong ears, medical ears. Dr. Pritchard learned of the death during a visit to a neighboring plantation. When he heard that Celia's child had been present, that Gaines had died with no medical explanation, something inside him tightened. He had seen Dina once already. He remembered the unnatural calm, the watchfulness, the feeling, the undeniable feeling, that she understood everything happening around her. Pritchard wrote to Dr. Saunders immediately, "We must examine the child again. We must." Saunders resisted at first. He had tried desperately to forget the case. But curiosity and fear are wounds that do not close easily. Strickland joined them without hesitation. He had remained silent for months, but the news of an unexplained death reignited the unease he'd been trying to bury. 3 men. 3 reputations. 3 nightmares resurfacing. They arrived at Hartwell Plantation on November 12, 1848. The atmosphere was different now, heavier, darker. Even Edmund seemed uneasy, though he masked it with irritation. "Make this quick," he said. "The child is healthy. You doctors made too much of your earlier examinations." But when Dina entered the room, Edmund's confidence dimmed. Even he felt it. She was only 20 months old, but her body resembled that of a child double that age. Tall, firm, coordinated. Her hair was neatly braided. Her steps were sure. Her eyes were too old. Celia stayed in the corner, staring at the floor, trembling. The doctors arranged their equipment on the table, but Strickland didn't begin by touching the child. He began by asking, "Dina, do you remember us?" Dina looked at each doctor in turn, her gaze unwavering. "Yes," she said. Not, "Yes, sir." Not the soft slur of a toddler. Just, "Yes." Clear. Confident. Certain. Pritchard felt his stomach tighten. "What do you remember?" he asked. Dina paused. Her eyes drifted over their faces, calm and analytical. "You were afraid," she said. Silence. "You still are." Celia's breath hitched. She covered her mouth with her hands. Saunders cleared his throat, trying to recover the facade of scientific control. "Dina, do you feel unwell? Any pain?" She tilted her head. "I feel everything." "How do you mean?" "I feel what people hide." Her voice didn't tremble, didn't waver. She spoke like someone stating the weather. Saunders forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "That's not possible, child." Dina blinked. "Then why are your hands shaking?" Saunders looked down. His hands were shaking. Strickland stepped forward. He crouched to meet Dina's eye level, his voice soft. "Do you hear things? Things people don't say aloud." "Yes." "How?" She shrugged. "I don't know. I just do." This was not the answer of a toddler. This was introspection. Conscious reflection. Strickland's jaw tightened. "Child, do you know what you are?" Dina nodded. "Yes." The doctors exchanged glances, struggling to speak. "What are you?" Strickland whispered. Dina raised her chin slightly. "I'm growing." That was all. No explanation. No fear. No confusion. Just a statement of fact. One that chilled all 3 men. The physical examination only worsened their fear. Her heart rate was steady and strong. Her reflexes were unervingly sharp. Her motor skills were beyond advanced. They were polished. But the most disturbing detail came when Strickland attempted to examine her throat. When he touched her chin to tilt her head, Dina grabbed his wrist. Not hard. Not violently. But with precise control. "No," she said. "That hurts." The grip was strong, stronger than a toddler should ever be. Strickland slowly pulled his hand away and Dina released him instantly. It was the precision, the awareness of exactly how much force she needed, that rattled him most. In his later notes he wrote, "Strength beyond age. Behavior beyond age. Comprehension beyond age. We are observing accelerated development unmatched in human biology." He stopped writing before the final sentence, but the indentation on the page reveals the words he almost wrote. Not human. When Edmund left the room to fetch a ledger, Celia finally spoke. Her voice shook. "She ain't my child. I told you that before. She ain't mine." Strickland turned to her gently. "What do you mean?" Celia's hands trembled as she clasped them together. "When she was inside me, it didn't feel like a baby. It felt like something growing too fast, pressing too hard. Like it was moving for a reason, not just 'cause it was alive." She looked up then, broken, exhausted, terrified. "And now I feel her in my head. She know when I'm scared. She know when I want to run. She know things I don't say." Pritchard swallowed. "My God." Celia whispered. She wearing a child's face, but something else behind it. Before Strickland could respond, Dina turned her head abruptly and looked at Celia. "You're thinking about running?" Celia gasped, stepping back as though struck. Dina continued, voice soft. "You won't." Celia's legs nearly gave out. The doctors stared, speechless. Because there was no way she could have known that, unless Celia had truly never spoken it aloud. Unless Dina sensed it. Unless Dina understood her mother on a level far beyond normal comprehension. The doctors ended the examination early. Not because they had finished, but because they could not tolerate staying in the room any longer. Their hands shook. Their voices faltered. Their certainty about nature collapsed with each sentence Dina spoke. They left quietly, each man carrying a fear he wouldn't dare say aloud. Back in Charleston, they submitted their third sealed report, the most alarming one yet. One line was underlined twice. The child's intelligence surpasses biological expectation. She possesses awareness inconsistent with human development. The Charleston Medical Society's response was immediate. Case closed. All files sealed. No further investigation permitted. 3 doctors. 3 sealed reports. 3 men who would later flee Charleston for good. But Dina remained. Growing. Learning. Watching. The question now was, what would she become next? 1831 Alabama. 1 plantation. 1 child too knowing. The blood nears its breaking point. After the doctor's final visit, something shifted on the Hartwell plantation. Not in the white world, but in the quarters. For Edmund, nothing important had changed. Dina was healthy, valuable. A curiosity maybe, but still just property. For the enslaved community, everything had changed. The doctors had come, stared into the eyes of the child who shouldn't exist, and left shaken. And then, just like the medical society, they chose silence. But the people who had to live beside that child? They didn't have the luxury of silence. They had to survive her. Night in the enslaved quarters became something different after the overseer's death. Before, people still talked, shared whispers, small moments of laughter, plans, prayers. Now voices dropped. Doors stayed shut. Children were pulled inside earlier. The laughter stopped. Samuel wrote, "It feel like the air don't belong to us no more. Like something else breathing through it." Whenever Dina walked near the cabins, conversations ended mid-sentence. Women pulled their children behind them. Men looked away, their jaws tight, hands clenched, bodies tense. They weren't trying to be cruel to a child. They were trying not to be seen by her. Because everyone knew the same thing now. She didn't just see. She understood. And sometimes, she changed things simply by being there. One afternoon, a boy named Elias, a child of about 8, stared too long at Dina. He didn't mean harm. He was just scared and curious. Later that evening, he told his mother. She looked at me and my chest hurt. His mother brushed it off as fear. Until Elias woke in the night gasping for breath. No infection. No fever. Just a sudden tightness in his chest. It passed by morning. But no one forgot. His mother wouldn't let him within 20 feet of Dina ever again. Ruth said quietly. Sometimes she'd do it without knowing. Things like that ain't always on purpose. That was the worst part. If Dina knew exactly what she was doing, maybe they could bargain or beg. But if she didn't, if her power moved on its own, then no one was safe. Celia, meanwhile, was crumbling from the inside out. She still worked in the main house. Still cooked. Still cleaned. Still did everything expected of her. But she moved like a ghost. Her eyes were hollow. Her shoulders hunched. Her steps slow and careful, as if the floor might give way beneath her. The other women tried to comfort her at first. They understood fear, grief, and pain. But this was different. Celia wasn't grieving a lost child. She was grieving the presence of one. One night, Samuel saw her standing behind the cabins, staring into the black tree line. He approached quietly. "Celia?" She didn't turn around. "I think about running," she whispered. "Where you gonna go?" Samuel asked softly. "They catch you, they kill you." "I ain't scared to die," Celia said. "I'm scared to leave her alive." The wind moved between the pines like a drawn-out sigh. Samuel swallowed. "You think she evil?" Celia's voice cracked. "I don't know if she evil. I just know she ain't, right?" She put a hand to her chest. "She in here. I feel her in my thoughts. When I wish she'd never been born, she look at me like she heard it. Sometimes I wake up and she already watching me, like she'd been waiting for me to think something." Tears slipped down her face. "I'm her mother, but I don't feel like no mother. I feel like a door that got used." Those words stuck with me when I read them in Samuel's journal. A door that got used. Not a womb. Not a home. A door. Ruth, seeing Celia fading day by day, finally decided to reveal everything she'd been hiding. It was late December. The sky was heavy with clouds. The quarters felt suffocated by cold and fear. Ruth sat beside Samuel's small fire and called Celia to her. Celia sat, arms wrapped around herself. Ruth stared into the flames for a long moment before speaking. "You know, I told you once I seen a child like Dina before." Celia nodded weakly. "I didn't tell you the end," Ruth said. Samuel watched silently, his charcoal in hand as always. The woman on that sugar plantation, the one whose child grew too fast, knew too much. The master tried to sell the child when it was 4. Nobody took it. Word got around. People said looking at it made their hearts beat wrong. Ruth's voice dropped. They say the child could tell when someone planning to run, or steal, or fight. The master used it like a tool. Made it sit and watch people. Celia's eyes widened with horror. One night, Ruth continued, the woman took her child down to the river. People heard her singing to it. They thought it was a lullaby. She paused. But she wasn't putting it to sleep. She was letting it go. Silence. What happened? Celia whispered. Ruth stared at the fire. They found them both in the water the next morning. Celia shook, her breathing shallow. And the plantation after? She asked. Ruth didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was flat. The fear lifted. Like it had been a storm and then the clouds finally moved. She turned to Celia. I ain't telling you what to do. I ain't God. I can't tell a mother to do what that woman did. Her eyes glistened. But I know this. Some things born in this world ain't meant to stay. And sometimes, it's the mother who understand that first. Celia didn't cry anymore. She just stared at the ground. Inside her, something hardened. Not hatred. Not evil. Resolve. The kind that made people do things they never would have imagined themselves capable of. From that day, something in Celia changed. She still feared Dina, but now her fear had a shape, a direction. She stopped backing away when Dina entered a room. Stopped shrinking when the child watched her. She studied her right back. Samuel noticed. She looked at the child like a woman measuring her own shadow, he wrote. Dina noticed too. One evening, as Celia prepared a small pot of food, Dina asked, You think about rivers now? Celia froze. Her hand tightened around the spoon. Dina tilted her head. You dream about water. About quiet. The spoon slipped. The room was silent. Celia didn't answer. Didn't deny it. Because at this point, she knew there was no point lying. Dina heard what her heart was planning. And yet, even then, the child seemed almost curious. Not angry. Not offended. Just curious. As if she was finally beginning to understand one thing she'd never fully grasped. Fear. Not hers. Her mother's. 1831 Alabama. One plantation. One mother reaching her breaking point. The blood turns toward fire. Before we continue, ask yourself, if the only way to save everyone else is to destroy what you brought into the world, could you do it? By February of 1849, fear was no longer a feeling on the Hartwell plantation. It was a resident. It lived in the cabins, sat on the porch steps, hung in the rafters, slept beside every man, woman, and child. And at the center of that fear stood a little girl whose feet barely touched the ground when she sat. A child who watched the world with eyes that seemed too calm, too ancient, too aware. But the fear inside Celia, that was something else entirely. It no longer came in waves. It stayed. She woke with it, walked with it, worked with it, went to sleep with it curled beside her like a second heartbeat. And Dina felt everything. She always did. In early February, strange things began happening in the quarters. A woman named Harriet woke one morning unable to speak for an hour. No sickness. No injury. Her voice simply vanished, until she saw Dina walk past her cabin and it returned. A man named Judah collapsed during field work. No fever. Just sudden weakness like something drained through him. Even the animals grew restless. Mules refused to pass the path leading to Celia's cabin. Dogs hid under wagons. The chickens avoided Dina entirely. But the most frightening change wasn't in the workers or the animals. It was in Dina. The child who once asked questions, now asked none. She grew quiet, observant, focused, as if she wasn't learning anymore, as if she already knew. Samuel wrote. She moved different now, like she waiting for something, like she growing towards something. Celia saw it too, and the resolve inside her solidified. She had run out of time. The turning point came the night before the fire. Celia awoke in the middle of the night without knowing why. The cabin was quiet. The moonlight slipped through the cracks in thin blue lines. Then she felt it. A presence. Not movement. Not breath. Not sound. A presence. She turned her head slowly. Dina was awake. She was sitting up, staring at Celia in the dark. Silent. So. Her eyes reflected the moonlight in a way no child's eyes should. Almost like they were glowing from deep within. Celia's breath caught. What you doin' awake? She whispered. Dina didn't answer. She just watched. like she was studying her mother's fear, measuring it. Celia felt her heartbeat pounding against her ribs like a warning drum. Then Dina spoke. Soft. Come. Knowing. You're leaving. Celia's whole body tensed. No, she whispered. I ain't. Yes, Dina said. You dream about it. You think about it. You feel it when you look at me. Her voice didn't rise, didn't tremble, didn't accuse, just stated the truth. And then she looked down at her own small hands. I don't want you to leave. Something inside Celia snapped. She covered her mouth to keep from crying out. Because that sentence, that soft little sentence, was the first thing Dina had ever said that sounded almost human. But even that made it worse. Celia whispered, voice cracking. Baby, I ain't running. Dina blinked slowly. You're lying. The words didn't come from suspicion. They came from certainty. A certainty that crumbled the last piece of Celia's strength. She lay back down, trembling, forcing her breathing into steadiness. But she didn't sleep again that night. And Dina watched her until dawn. The next day, Celia barely spoke. Barely ate. Barely blinked. She moved like someone preparing for her own funeral. Ruth saw her staring at the sky and whispered, You can't save everybody, Celia, but you can end the fear. Celia didn't respond. She didn't have to. Her face already carried the answer. Samuel noticed a strange calm around her that morning, like the eye of a storm. He wrote, She looked lighter today. Not happy. Not sad. Just decided. That night, the night of February 23rd, winter winds swept across the fields. The stars were unusually bright, sharp as needles. But over the quarters the sky felt wrong. So, unmoving. Too quiet. Like it was holding its breath. Celia tucked Dina into her small straw bed. She kissed her forehead for the first time. Dina frowned. Why you sad? She asked. Celia choked back a sob. I love you, she whispered. Dina tilted her head. You don't, but you want to. That broke Celia's heart open. She pressed her forehead against her child's. Baby, I wish you was mine. I wish you was just a child. A single tear fell onto Dina's cheek. The child touched it with her fingertip, then said quietly, I don't understand this. Celia nodded. I know. She stood, walked to the door, closed it, locked it, then pushed the table against it. Her hands shook violently, but her decision did not. She turned back toward Dina. The child sat up slowly. Are we going somewhere? She asked. Yes, Celia whispered. We going somewhere together. Celia picked up the oil lamps. She held one close to her chest. She looked at her daughter one last time. For a moment, just for a moment, something soft flickered across Dina's face. Confusion. Sadness. Something close to fear. Mommy? She whispered for the first time. Celia collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Then she stood. She opened the lamp. And she let the fire out. The flames spread impossibly fast, rushing across the floorboards, up the walls, wrapping the cabin in a cocoon of heat. People woke to the screams. By the time the quarters gathered outside, the cabin was engulfed. The fire glowed like a furnace. Screams turned to silence. The roof collapsed, and the sky above seemed to stop moving. Samuel wrote, Fear lifted that night, like something evil burned out of the air. Ruth fell to her knees whispering prayers. Some cried. Some crossed themselves. Some simply stared. But all knew the same thing. Celia had done what no one else could. She ended it. Not out of hate. Out of love. Twisted, desperate, impossible love. The kind born from terror. The kind born from sacrifice. 1831 Alabama. One plantation. One fire that swallowed fear. The blood prepares its last breath. By dawn on February 24, 1849, the fire at Celia's cabin was nothing but a blackened skeleton of wood and ash. The boards had collapsed inward. The roof was gone. Smoke curled upward in thin, exhausted threads. 2 bodies lay inside the ruins. One small, one larger, burned beyond recognition. The official record said, enslaved woman and her child. Those who lived there knew them as something else. A mother who could not live with what the world put inside her. And a child who should never have existed at all. Dr. Saunders was called again, not out of compassion, not out of respect, but because Edmund Hartwell needed a conclusion he could file away and forget. Saunders examined what remained of Celia and Dina. He noticed details most men would have missed. The door had been barricaded from the inside. Furniture shoved against it. The oil lamps had not fallen by accident. They'd been broken and scattered. His report, filed, signed, and then immediately buried in the Medical Society's archives, said this. Evidence suggests deliberate ignition. Mother appears to have initiated the fire from within the secured cabin. Mental disturbance likely contributed. Official cause, accidental death exacerbated by unsound mind. It was the neatest possible lie he could write. Accident. Unsound mind. Case closed. No mention of the impossible pregnancy. No mention of accelerated growth. No mention of the overseer who had died with terror in his frozen face. He gave Edmund what he needed. A way to move on. The enslaved community didn't move on. They survived. That's different. They watched the smoke rise and felt something heavy loosen in their chests. Fear didn't vanish entirely, but it shifted. For the first time in 2 years, they could stand outside at night without feeling watched. Children played again, cautiously at first, then louder. Women spoke above a whisper. Men walked without constantly glancing over their shoulders. Samuel wrote, "The air feel lighter. Like a storm past. We still in chains. We still not free. But that thing gone." Celia took it with her. Ruth, when questioned by the new overseer, said only, Celia's mind was troubled. She probably knocked the lamp over. These things happen. She lied to protect the truth. A truth that would have never been accepted by the white men in charge. That a woman with no rights had made the hardest choice a mother could ever make. And she had done it to save the very people who were still called property. What happened next followed a pattern so many dark stories follow in history. The people closest to the horror remembered. The people with power refused to. Within a few months, the Hartwell plantation settled into a new normal. A new overseer, William Fletcher, took Gaines's place. The crops continued. The ledgers filled. The years passed. In 1864, just before the Civil War tore through the South, Edmund Hartwell died of a stroke in his sleep. His estate was eventually divided, sold, and developed. New houses rose over old foundations. Roads cut through fields that had once held cabins. Somewhere underneath those roads, beneath parking lots and sidewalks and manicured lawns, lie the ashes of a woman and a child. No marker. No names. Just dirt, roots, and silence. The doctors could not escape what they had seen. Within a year of the fire, all 3 of them were gone from Charleston. Dr. Pritchard left for Philadelphia and rarely spoke of his years in the South again. Dr. Saunders retired early to Virginia, his practice quietly ending. Dr. Strickland abandoned medicine entirely and retreated into private life. None of them published a single word about the case. The only trace they left behind sat sealed in the Charleston Medical Society archives. 4 reports, 1 autopsy description, and a handful of journal entries that never made it into the official discussion. They documented everything, then ran from their own evidence. And that, to me, may be the most telling part of this story. Men who built their lives on the certainty of science saw something that shattered that certainty. Instead of facing it, they did what Charleston always did. They buried it. When I first opened that archive folder, when I touched the paper these men had signed with shaking hands, I expected exaggeration, superstition, hysteria. What I found instead was cold, clinical, meticulous detail. Dates, measurements, heart tones, recorded observations from multiple physicians. No embellishment, no religious panic. Just this. A pregnancy that went from invisible to full term in less than a week. A child who grew twice as fast as she should. A mind inside that child that didn't behave like a child's mind. And a mother who felt used. Not loved. Not chosen. Used. Something had come through her and she could not live with it. Was it a genetic anomaly? A rare condition science still hasn't properly named? A combination of trauma, malnutrition, and misdiagnosed reality? Was it mass hysteria? An entire community reading fear into every coincidence? Or was it something else? Something that doesn't fit neatly into the categories we're comfortable with? Every explanation feels incomplete. But that's what unsettles me most. Not the possibility of something supernatural. The possibility that something very real happened inside Celia's body, and we still don't understand what it was. We like to believe we've mapped every corner of human biology. Stories like this remind us we have not. And then there's the other question. The one that sits underneath the science. Even if you strip away the mystery. Even if you say Dina was just a strange, damaged, accelerated child. Was Celia wrong? She killed herself. She killed her daughter. From the outside, that is murder. From the inside, from the perspective of a woman with no rights, no voice, no protection, and no help. Was it something else? A crime? A sacrifice? A desperate act of protection? Ruth believed Celia saved them. Samuel believed the air changed when Dina died. Everyone on that plantation breathed easier afterward. History will never call Celia a hero. It doesn't even call her by name. It calls her enslaved woman deceased. The rest of her story is buried in ash and sealed documents. But those documents still exist. They sit in temperature-controlled rooms, in boxes with reference numbers and restricted access labels. They wait for hands willing to touch them, eyes willing to read them, minds willing to admit one terrifying truth. Not everything we bury stays dead. Some stories refuse to stay quiet. Some names claw their way back out of the paper. Celia is one of them. Dina is another. 1831 Alabama. One plantation. One mother. One impossible child. And a city that chose silence over truth. Now I'll ask you, what do you think happened on the Hartwell plantation? Do you believe this was a medical mystery science hasn't solved yet? Do you think fear and trauma twisted reality for everyone who saw Dina? Or do you believe Celia felt something real moving beneath her skin? Something that didn't belong in this world? Tell me in the comments. I read every theory. And if you've stayed with this story this long, you're exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Someone who doesn't look away when history gets dark. So subscribe now, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who loves hidden, uncomfortable chapters of the past. Because in the next story we're going back into another sealed archive, another buried file, and another case Charleston and America tried very hard to erase. I'll meet you there.